One of the great poetic innovators to follow in Baudelaire's wake is Paul Verlaine. Very colorful life. Google it. It can lead to some interesting contributions in interpreting the work. Mainly what his contribution was on the page is a firming up of what became known as the symbolist movement, which is the tradition that takes its lead from Baudelaire, develops through Mallarmé and Verlaine and others, where it is a very ephemeral type of artistry, where art is supposed to address very abstract truths in very indirect ways. So what you get is this belief that true art, that true beauty, deals with a kind of ideal that is unassailable in human terms, so we can only see glimpses of it. So perspective becomes a very key element with it. The inability of humanity to deal with concepts such as this. And here you can see the falling away of, or the turning away from realism, where the idea that if you can portray something realistically, there's really no value to that. But what is really valuable is in seeing the possibilities of beauty and truth in the world, and diverting from that realist portrayal of it. And so you get a lot of fun poetry out of that. You get a lot of very creative poetry out of that, a lot of very idealistic and avant-garde for its time, confusing poetry sometimes out of that. For Verlaine, what that tends to be music. Sound is very important to Verlaine. And to read his poetry in a translation never quite makes it, because he is so dealing with the sound of the words. But a lot of them come close, and the themes are still there in the best translations. You can see in the attention to music was a sense of the evanescent. Music is unique among the arts in that it has really no form, no material essence. It is all just sound, and that attracted the symbolist poets. So it's Verlaine really makes it. He focuses most attentively to that aspect of poetry, but it really was very broadly shared. That value was broadly shared among others of his ilk. The poet, or not the poet, the critic Edmund Wilson, famous American critic, said to approximate the indefiniteness of music was one of the principal aims of symbolism, the indefiniteness. So it's always just out of conception, just beyond our capacities, our ability to see it, to touch it, to get a sense of its material nature, because it has no material nature. It is always beyond our clotted capacity. But they have a lot of fun with that. Like I said, the translations can be a little iffy, but the sheer number of ways that Verlaine deals with musicality means that you can get a pretty good sense, even if you're not particularly comfortable with even if you have no capacity for reading French, you can go and see the original and get a sense of, oh, okay, the rhyme scheme is fairly elaborate sometimes, and there's a kind of a playfulness about it. And when dealing with the translation, you start to get a sense of, okay, I know what these words mean now, and they all tend to deal with sound. So much of it is about how things sound. And whenever you see so much conspicuous attention to something, you have to ask, well, why? And, well, maybe it's because you cannot see something. We're dealing with that which is invisible, that has no material essence, so we're going with sound. These are the questions you should ask. But Verlaine is fun. Autumn Song. With long sobs, the violent throbs of autumn wound my heart with languorous and monotonous sound. And you hear that sound tolling through with its very regular in its rhythm and its sound. Assonance, repeated vowel sounds throughout, and it's a very toll type sound. Which is inherently mournful. Perhaps it is autumn song, autumn associated with aging and loss, and ultimately leading towards death. Choking and pale when I mind the tale, the hours keep, my memory strays down the other days, and I weep. Choking and pale when I mind the tale, the hours keep. Consciousness when I mind the tale, consciousness of a worldly reality, just awareness of it as you're trying to escape it. My memory strays down other days and I weep. The mind is sort of diverting from reality. The mind is trying to escape. Perhaps it can't. Perhaps it's already estranged from reality in some way. Your imagination is feeling isolated. Your sense of yourself, your identity feels isolated and alone in comparison with the rest of the world. All of these themes, now you can dismiss this as, well, it just is trying to sound a certain way. Yeah, but within that, the words that he's choosing, aside from their sound, are driving this message of a kind of alienation, a kind of bereft quality of living in a material world when your spirit is immaterial. And I let me go where ill winds blow, now here, now there, harried and sped, even as a dead leaf, anywhere. Emotion and pain is still preferable to the ordinary, to the mundane. The sense of feeling is precious in Verlaine. And the sense of being dislocated, separated from everything else because you are a spirit in a material world and you feel no grounding. And this comes up again and again and again. Another fun one, wooden horses. He sees a carousel. Turn, good wooden horses, round 100 turns, 1,000 turns, forever turn till the axles burn, turn, turn to the oboe's sound. Again, he gets that sound in there, and you can automatically go to the repetition, the circling of the carousel, but also you can hear in that first stanza the vague echoes of that kind of sing-song music box tune that a carousel will tend to play, and that will stay in your head for the rest of the day after you hear it. The big soldier with the fattest maid ride your backs as if in their chamber, addressing the horses, because their masters have also made an outing today in the Bois de Cambre. Turn, turn, horses of their hearts, while all around you're whirling there are the clever sharpers at their art, turn to the cornet's bragging blare. Um, hmm. It's as much fun as getting dead drunk to ride this silly ring. Good for the belly, bad for the head. A plenty good and a plenty bad thing. Getting dead drunk. Sense of, well, the poem itself is sort of driving a kind of disorientation, which is a confusing of perspective, which is pure symbolism. But also, there, again, you go into the biography a little bit. This is the era of, well, this is when art tends to leave the polite middle class behind. The artist is increasingly an outlaw, an outcast, a rebel who rejects bourgeois values of sobriety and good conduct. And so Verlaine, like Baudelaire, and a whole number of others of that ilk, particularly in that time, reject the morality of society and charge ahead with their own aesthetic and well, their own ethics. Turn, turn, no need today of any spurs to make you bound, galloping round and round. Turn, turn, without hope of hay, without hope. Horses going around and around without hope of hay. Well, hay can be any number of things, obviously, but without hope. To just go around without any hope of release, of redemption, of an afterlife. And hurry, horses of their love. Already night is falling here, and the pigeon flies to join the dove, far from madam, far from the fair. Turn, turn, slow evening comes, in velvet, buttoned up with stars. Away the lovers go in pairs, turn the beat of the joyous drums. Again, that sense of it's just sort of meaningless, this endless circling around and around. It's very playful, it's very lively, but you go nowhere. But you gotta love, even in translation, that imagery. You know, the slow evening comes in velvet, buttoned up with stars. That's beautiful. That's just, that's a striking lushness in the imagery that, again, very much in the symbolist vein. This kind of attention to the superficiality, the evanescence of something, the sheer style just reeks of over the top. And this is a point because it's calling attention to itself, because it's sort of admitting implicitly that, well, we can only deal with surfaces. We can only try and make them pretty because we have no capacity to deal with the fundamental truths beneath them. We might try and do that, but we fail every time. This is the trap of realism. It only goes so far. It doesn't really deal with the big stuff, which is the ideals. One of his more famous ones, The Art of Poetry, where he gives a little inside baseball, but in his own way. You must have music, first of all. Obviously. That's what every poem he writes is about. But here he's telling you very explicitly his top priority: you must have music first of all, and for that a rhythm uneven is best. If you read in the original French, there's not a very steady rhyme or meter throughout, rather, where it can be a little herky jerky, almost like some of those music box things or organ grinders, where it's just a little and all over the place. It is conspicuous and at times quite crass, but it calls attention to itself because it doesn't want to just fit neatly into the box. You must have music first of all, and for that a rhythm uneven is best, vague in the air and soluble, with nothing heavy and nothing at rest. Soluble means it can turn to liquid, and that kind of liquid flowing is very important within symbolism writ large. Vague in the air. Everything has to be vague in Verlaine. Everything has to be vague in symbolism, because you can't be explicit, because you're trying to talk about the essentially evanescent. You must not scorn to do some wrong in choosing the words to fill your lines. Nothing more dear than the tipsy song when the undefined and exact combine. Ooh, the undefined and the exact. It is that meeting of the ideal and the reality that is so pregnant with possibilities. But also a sense of, you must not scorn to do some wrong in choosing words to fill your rhyme. It's like, well, okay, if don't sweat it if your word is maybe a little coarse, maybe a little crass. Baudelaire got a lot of flack for choosing ugly, unpoetic words. Your vocabulary should be more refined according to the old way of thinking. But here Verlaine is saying, no, you got to get that. There is beauty in ugliness. And without that ugliness, it's false, because ugliness is part of life. Beauty is part of life too. But if you want an accurate representation of what it is to be alive, what it is to be human, you have to embrace it all and not just censored like, ooh, poo-poo. That would be a bourgeois attitude of, oh, that's inappropriate, that's not right. He's saying, no, give it all to me. It is the veiled and lovely eye, the full noon quivering with light. It is, in the cool of an autumn night, the blue confusion of stars at night. Confusion is very big. Never the color, always the shade. Ooh, I love that. Always the nuance is supreme. The suggestion, not the coarse material reality. Only by shade is the truffle made between flute and horn of dream with dream. Wow. The vagueness of it, I like how he gets color and shade in there as a kind of color is very specific, but shade is very vague and immaterial and negotiable. It's nuanced. And so, between the flute and the horn, more music, only by shade is the truffle made between flute and horn. Flute is very very soft and high pitched. The horn tends to be lower pitch and brassy. Of dream with dream, the connections and contrast between sound and the dream state. Epigrams an assassin, keep away from him fierce wit and vicious laughter that makes the azure weep, and from all that garlic of vulgar dishes. Epigrams an assassin, a great line, but the idea is sort of shooting back at more the Enlightenment people like Pope, who tend to tie up everything in a neat little bow and give you this polite little couplet, usually, where it is like all wisdom and is the perception or the portrayal of the poet as a kind of cookie cutter, or fortune cookie delivery system of little pearls of wisdom, which is a pose for the poet, and it tends to warp poetry into something other than art. It tries to become some kind of wisdom literature that he is saying, no, leave all that stuff behind. Keep away from him fierce wit and vicious laughter that makes the azure weep. Don't get too carried away with all that. And from all that garlic of vulgar dishes. Verlaine could be a little bit snooty, let's say. The garlic of vulgar dishes is a shot at perhaps lower class people, in his mind. There is, again, with this kind of art, this kind of poetry, in his case, a very real elitism. It is the pose of the aesthete who is above the common fray. So that snootiness, I think it's fair to say, is expected. You, this is, it's only going to get worse from here, honestly, as you move it into the 20th century. Take eloquence and wring his neck. You would do well by force and care wisely to hold rhyme in check. Or she's off if you don't watch God knows where. Again, trimming back on the traditions of poetry that have been handed back to him. You know, screw eloquence. Reach for the ugly word, the uncomfortable word that doesn't quite fit in the neat little portrait that your poem is portraying. You would do well by forcing care wisely to hold rhyme in check, or she's off and don't if you don't watch God knows where. So don't let rhyme dictate exactly what you say at all times. The words are going to go where they are. Symbolist poets, Verlaine keeps within fairly structured forms in terms of rhyme and meter, conspicuously flaunting them at certain points, but basically hewing to the idea of them. Free verse, however, is becoming much more common, and within the symbolist movement, it's going to get pushed further as the 20th century dawns, and you're going to get more of that, where they're totally throwing out the whole notion that, well, you know, rhyme and meter, who needs that? I'm going to be a poet anyway. Oh, who will tell the wrongs of rhyme? What crazy Negro or deaf child made this trinket for a dime, sounding hollow and false when filed? Crazy Negro or deaf child, you know, again, the elitism, the snootiness, well, you know. Let there be music again and forever. Let your verse be quick-winged thing and light, such as one feels when a new love's fervor to the other skies wings the souls in flight. Happy-go-lucky, let your lines disheveled run where the dawn winds lure, smelling of wild mint, smelling of time, and all the rest is literature. Which is a great line. All the rest is just literature. Ew. We don't want that. We want art. Let your lines disheveled run where the dawn winds lure. Disheveled run. Your lines can just straggle on forever. He's, again, fighting back against the idea of the closed couplet, which ends neatly at the end of each line instead of dragging on, the sentence dragging on to another line. He likes a good, you know, or that the closed couplet likes a period at the end of every line, or, you know, every second line if it's a couplet. But but here he's saying, you know, no, let it be ugly, let it be disheveled, let it be a little messy. Nobody wants anything too clean. Significantly, however, look at that last stanza, and the way he rhymes lure and literature in the translation. Lure and literature, gee, they rhyme. So while he's making this big stink about rhyme, he ends significantly, beginnings and endings, very important, he ends significantly with a rhyme. And, well, okay, and that last line, all the rest is literature, which I love so much, is, well, it is inarguably it's an epigram. It's a one-line dig. He is inarguably not practicing what he's preaching. Perhaps that is a little bit hypocritical. Maybe it's pointing out that as a poet, He is not to be trusted because the general theme of the poem is that, well, poets shouldn't pose as, great fonts of wisdom. You shouldn't, try and be godlike in your pronouncements. So he can be flawed. So he can be hypocritical. So he can be, completely wrong in matching up his form and content. The translation, is fairly close. Here, the rhyme scheme is a little bit different than the original. Here, he's rhyming in the original. He's rhyming aventure with littérature, and aventure is the first line. So he's got an A, B, C, A rhyme scheme in the original. But still, it's a rhyme. And that last line is just it is such a button that he hits, to use a theater term. But is that false? Is that hypocritical? Is he winking at the reader somehow in that? Is this somebody you can trust? Because throughout, the poem is very charming in a way, and he's got all of these great lines in it, all of these great little word choices that he seems to be railing against. He's practicing so much against what he preaches. It puts you in a confusing position. He doesn't want the reader to settle in any of this stuff, and to settle in too comfortably in any conception of what art is or how art should be received. He wants the reader to be actively engaged, whether actively engaged by swaying to the music and getting transported, or actively engaged in saying, well, now, wait a minute, what's going on here? He doesn't want the bourgeois attitude of just sitting down and reading a book of poetry at the end of the day and feeling comforted and coddled and reinforcing all of the bourgeois stereotypes of feeling in control of your life. He is not a poet of control. He is a poet of chaos in a very real sense. And he wants to show his readers that chaos is not limited to his life. It is endemic. And it's not all bad. That kind of lack of organization, that lack of an ordered, structured society ordained by God, and morality, and social responsibility, and all of these watchwords of conformity. When you leave that behind, there's good stuff out there. It might be chaos, but maybe by leaving all of those illusions behind, you're attaining something more. You're reaching for something more valuable. One of my favorites. This is from a translation by Norman Shapiro. To me, it captures so much of what Verlaine tries to do in general. He wrote a fair amount throughout his life. He was fairly productive, but this one I just happen to like. Tantalized. The prison wing that I am quartered in faces a railroad station, and the din of the machinery coupling trains lull my long nights, sleepless for all my pains, clattering nests for gods of coal, glass, steel. My mind fancies young birds that clatter, squeal, ready to take their flight, untrammeled, fly up, up into the still, dark, dawn-tinged sky above the plain's deep mauve obscurity. Oh, trains that can go rolling, rolling free. It's got so much going on in here. It is him. He's in a prison wing, so he's kind of down on his luck. He's not in a good place, let's say. And he looks out the window at what is a fairly ugly scene, and a railroad station. Probably a lot of dirt, a lot of crowd. Well, honestly, the French railroad stations are fairly gorgeous architecturally. But from here, you get the sense that he's just seeing something kind of crass, and like it's his version of looking out on a dumpster, perhaps. And there's a lot of noise and harsh noise. He's got the clattering nest for gods of coal, glass, and steel. The din of the machinery, the coupling trains, and you're getting this sense of all of this harsh noise coming at him. But he looks at it and he turns away. That is his reality. That's the reality he's looking at, but he turns away from it. My mind fancies young birds that clatter. They're not there. The birds are imaginary. He's looking at his reality and he's saying, not so much. And he goes off in his other direction, the direction of his imagination. The imagination transports him through nothing, through fantasy. The ideal of birds and the songs of birds and the beauty that he could be seeing up into the still dark dawn-tinged sky above the plains, deep mauve obscurity. I love that, mauve obscurity. The definiteness of the color matched against the obscurity, which is just what you can't see. There's such a great matching there. And then he brings it back at the end. Having transported himself through that, he looks back down at the reality and sees the potential within it. Oh, trains that can go rolling free. So now it's no longer just, the noise and the clutter and the crowds and, the bustle that he doesn't really want to have to look at. Now, having transported himself through imagination to an ideal place, he looks back down at the trains and he imagines them running free. He imagines them as a kind of untrammeled energy. He was not the first poet in the 1800s to look at trains and imagine the kind of passion that they symbolize, the energy, the speed, the dream of transport. But he uses it he uses it as a reference point for reality. Reality at first is ugly. You bring in the mind and the imagination and the ideal, and then the reality is better. It's almost Wordsworthian in its romanticism, but there's something more dislocated about it. He's not remembering birds, he's imagining birds. He's not remembering a sky like Wordsworth would. He's imagining the sky. It's completely dislocated from any reality of nature or anything grounded in material, observable fact. He's conjuring an ideal. And through living with that ideal, the reality in this dark little moment of his life in prison, the reality gets better. That's what Verlaine offers.